Welcome to another episode at the Fitness Oracle. Today, we're sitting down with Kevin McShan from Let's Have This Conversation. And Kevin is a very interesting young man. I'm going to call him a young man because he is compared to me. We had a really great conversation when it came to, dealing with disabilities, overcoming obstacles, fostering inclusion and diversity because of his disability, equality and equity in the workplace from disabilities, physical disabilities, fitness success while living with a disability and making fitness a priority. Now, Kevin brings a very interesting um, perspective to this whole game when it comes to health and wellness and mental states because he is physically disabled. And while the conversation may be a little I don't want to use I don't want to use the word or the term hard or difficult. Um, Listen to what he has to say. He has a wealth of knowledge from personal experience because of his disability, and he's very inspirational. I loved interviewing him. He's a joy to talk to. I'm sure you guys will feel the same way. As usual, grab a pen and paper, grab a cup of Joe, and enjoy the show. Welcome to the Fitness Oracle, where we have real conversations with real people just like you, with real stories just like yours. And this is one of their stories. I am your host, John Katsavos. My guest today is Kevin McShan from Let's Have This Conversation podcast. Though Kevin's experience is in sports journalism, podcasting, and advocating for those with disabilities, he brings an exciting blend of education, experience, and entertainment to the motivational speaking industry. Kevin, welcome to the show.
John, it's fabulous to be here, and thanks for letting me hang out with you this weekend. I'm excited about it, buddy.
That's going to be a great show. I can feel it. I can feel it's brewing. How's back in Canada? How's Windsor, Ontario? I haven't been to Windsor in years.
Winter is doing just great. We're getting up into the mid 80s today, and we value summer around here, John, as you know, because in Canada we get all four seasons. So we value summer more than most people, right?
I'll be honest with you. It's one of the seasons that I used to look forward to so many times, but now being here in South Florida, it's getting a little
Redundant?
I wouldn't say redundant. I'd say more on the lines of spoiled.
Oh, well, you can look at it that way as well. Yeah, I love Florida too. It's 80 degrees and sunny almost every day down there, right?
Actually, today it hit the hundreds. So,
well, you're right in the middle of summer, right?
yeah, we're right in the dead smack middle of summer here. Um, I asked this question for a lot of my guests, and I'm just curious, what got you into this line of work that you do with your podcast and your company?
You know, the podcast actually started. I'll give you a funny story. It started because I was laid off from a job because of COVID. A week before I was to start a new, so I used to be the ambassador for a program called the Discoverability Network, which was an online job matching portal for individuals with disabilities and employers to get connected. Get connected, and a week before my contract was supposed to start, COVID hit, so I had some extra time, and I wanted to sort of release my creative energy, so I started the podcast in May of 2020, and I am just under 15 episodes shy of 500 episodes for the endeavor. So what got me into it was, first of all, I wanted something to do other than watch Netflix during COVID, right? So, but I wanted an avenue or a vehicle to have authentic conversations about the news cycle that moves the needle of progress. So that's what inspires me to do the work that I do with the podcast.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I too started my podcast because of COVID, for different reasons, but we won't get into that. Have there been times where you've wanted to quit?
Podcast? Yeah, during the editing process. No, I'm kidding. But I look at podcasting as an opportunity. John, as you know, I was born with spastic quadriplegic cerebral palsy. So having a podcast and having a vehicle for social conversation and interaction, actually, I view as a bonus because it's an extension of sort of a social life in my way of sort of extending the arm of conversation and camaraderie and building the community. So I look at podcasting not as a chore, but as a vehicle to continue the opportunity and conversation for inclusion, but certainly to be a successful podcaster, and you know this, you have to have some level of commitment, and you have to have some level of cohesion in terms of when you release episodes and be consistent with your messaging and branding. So it is a lot of work, but I look at it as a chance to further promote diversity, equity, and inclusion because I try to cover a wide range of topics on my podcast. So I look at it as a net positive rather than a net negative.
That's awesome. And for you to be at like short of 500 episodes, I mean, that's that's
Well,
amazing. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Because there's times where I'm like you said, like with the editing stuff, it's like, yeah, I don't want to do this no more.
yeah. Well, it teaches you discipline and it teaches you to keep a schedule, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And it's so easy for us to say, you know what, I'm just going to take the rest of the day off. But when you got an episode scheduled for release, it's like you got to make sure everything is all your ducks in the row. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
it's interesting because like we all have our own special obstacles that life throws at us, and always like my aunt was down here for 10 days. And she just went back at the time of this recording. She went back home to Toronto yesterday. So like I had other obstacles that were thrown into play, but I'm sure that you have your own unique obstacles. Uh, what kind of obstacles have you seen in the past that you've had to deal with your cerebral palsy?
Well, how much time do you have? No, I'm kidding. Um,
We got all the time that you need.
uh, life is, I look at life as a grand adventure. And, the way I look at my disability is this. I always tell myself I can either make my circumstances work for me or I can work for my circumstances. So, yeah, my disability affects things like muscle movement, muscle dexterity, my endurance, and my ability to walk. And, I'll tell you the story that changed my life. I know we were going to get into this a little bit later, but I'll give you a sort of a preview and you can follow up if you wish. But the event that changed my life, Jonathan, happened when I was 9 or 10 years old. I had just come back from Thames Valley Children's Hospital in London, where all of my surgeries were performed. And the doctor, before we had left the hospital in London, he had brought myself and my parents into a conference room at the hospital, and he said, medically, there was nothing else that doctors could do for me, and I would have to use a wheelchair and a walker for the rest of my life to be mobile. So as I was going through that process of processing that information, I had to go back to elementary school, and I credit my elementary school principal because when her name was Dr. Carol Krulin, and I credit her because I went back to school and she had everyone in her office that was in charge of my file, from social workers to therapists to teachers, and they were all gathered at a table, and my parents were there, and she looked at me after I had explained the story of what the doctor had told me and my parents, which she already knew, but it was a cathartic experience for me to get it out. And she looked at me and she said, the only limitations on your life are the artificial ones that you place on yourself. So, yes, I have physical limitations, but I also have a different perspective and a different way of solving problems. So I look at life, Jonathan, I live my life through the saying that inclusion is the gateway to independence. So I look at my life as an extension of uh, promoting an inclusive atmosphere and environment for everyone to sort of thrive in whatever their own definition of success is. So obstacles are what you look at them as, but I look at obstacles as another way to find opportunities in life.
I absolutely love that. I love how the principal said that whatever limitations that you have, you place on yourself. And she's 1000% right. Um, how have you changed that message that you heard so many years ago to help others?
Like I mentioned earlier, one of my biggest passions in life is making sure that folks with disabilities are gainfully employed. Um, here in Canada, Jonathan, people with disabilities are underemployed by a clip of 59% more than their non-disabled counterparts. And once you give a person a job, you also provide them with a sense of uh, not only financial security but societal inclusion and a sense of belonging. So to answer that question in the short term, I look at my podcast and the other work that I do to advocate for folks with disabilities is important work because it gives them a chance to be heard, and it also gives them a chance to provide their own perspective on how the world works.
That's really great. We're going to get a lot more deeper into how the workplace views people with physical disabilities and how they can actually improve on their practices if they need to improve. I think that there's a few companies out there that are pretty good with that stuff, but we'll get into that a little bit later in the show. I want to focus a little bit longer on this overcoming obstacles because obstacles, like, we see them all the time. They come in different forms, different colors, different shapes, different everything. What are some of the obstacles that you've had to help some people with?
I think the biggest one when you have a physical disability and any sort of disability is the attitudinal barriers, not only in employment but also in societal life. You know, leveling the playing field starts with um, increasingly understanding and embracing diversity as a strength of people. You know, when I worked in inclusive employment, Jonathan, I always told employers that it's sometimes important to fit the job to the person instead of fitting the person to a job. You know, sometimes you have to be able and willing to adaptability. It is a big strength, whether it's in your personal or professional life. So I think the biggest thing that I help or attempt to help people overcome is the attitudinal barriers and also giving them the strength and conviction within themselves to set goals, that really matter and move their own definition of a needle of progress. Because you know, I always say that everyone's portrait of success is different. So changing the attitudinal barriers and really having a mind shift of prosperity in life, because prosperity for me is different than what would be for other people. So I think it's creating an environment where we can shift attitudes and expectations of society and the person at large. Because you know, I always say if you're struggling with a job search or if you're struggling just generally in life, you have the power to write your own narrative of your own story. So whatever you're going through in life, whether you have a disability or not, at the end of the day, you can seek counsel from other people and you can seek advice to make informed decisions. But the first thing you have to do when you have a disability is build your wall of inner strength, which can't be penetrated by anyone else but yourself. Because if you build a wall of inner strength, Jonathan, you then have the opportunity to build the self confidence even when barriers or shortcomings uh, arise, and you have the knowledge and strength and power within yourself to overcome any obstacles that you might face.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I completely agree with you with that. I think there's a lot of weak people out there, and it's just because the way society has made us to, be comforted and stuff like that. Are there any tools that you use to help build that inner strength, that those inner walls that you just talked about with yourself and with others?
Yeah, so for myself personally, I have a 5 step system to when I set a goal, and I use this in my personal life. So, why are you setting a goal? Why is it important that you're setting a goal? When, when you answer that question, then it comes to what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve? What's the timetable that you're giving yourself to achieve the goal? What are the resources that you have to achieve the goal? And is there a community of support that you need to create in order to accomplish the goal that you've set out uh, to accomplish? And what sort of intellectual or brain power do you already have to solve the problem or to ascend the goal that you've um, created for yourself to completion? So that's sort of the system that I use when setting goals in my personal and professional life.
What about the days that are just, hard? You know what I mean? Like it's like I don't feel like doing it. I want to feel sorry for myself. Do you have any tools that help people get out of that kind of mindset? Because that affects a lot of people.
You know, Jonathan, I believe very strongly in the power of perseverance. That, you know, having a disability and my particular form of disability, um, I deal every day with uh, it's not particularly easy for me to get up and go to a function without a pre-planned schedule. It's not. Uh, I always say that I create my own level of spontaneity if I have the resources to do it. So, I attempt. One of the reasons I started the podcast was to eliminate some uh, forms of social isolation. But you know, in in a nutshell, I think that when you go through isolation, whether it be social, economic, or societal, I think there are three principles to overcoming that. And for me, it always starts with the end goal in mind. What's the end goal? Where are you at in achieving the end goal? And when you want to get over the hump or over the isolation, you just have to view that as your moment of prosperity. So, so when you have those moments, you have the motivation and fuel to persevere. So the first is recognizing what the end goal is, and then setting yourself up with a framework to persevere. And then it's about creating the conditions to celebrate the accomplishments you've made. So again, it's about where you are now, uh, where you want to persevere to, and how are you going to celebrate the wins that you've accomplished after you've overcome the adversity.
We're going to be switching gears a little bit now. We're going to be talking a little bit about fostering inclusion and diversity, and we're going to be talking a lot about the workplace. When it comes to the workplace, you hear this a lot when it comes from workplace environments that they're trying to change the culture and trying to, make it a culture-based workplace. What does that mean to you?
It means creating the conditions for success. It's one thing to put on the end of a job application that we're an equal opportunity employer. But if you don't implement the practices to do that, then you're just checking off a box that the government says you have to because you have to make people feel included. So it's about creating the culture to be successful. And once you feel that you've created the culture, it's about implementing it uh, authentically. And that means actually hiring people that don't look like you, that don't have the same perspective as you do, or because I think there's value in diversity, and that comes from varying perspectives. If you look like if the people that work for you look like you and think like you and have the same approach to life, then 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 the object of diversifying isn't accomplished because then you just create a condition or environment that you're you're comfortable in. So creating an inclusive culture also sometimes has to start with creating conditions to make the status quo uncomfortable. And when you do that, when you hire inclusively, you're given an inside edge or an inside advantage of creating a competitive edge over your competition because the perspectives you gain by hiring people with differing perspectives is not only a smart thing for your business, it's not only the right thing to do, but in today's world, it's the practical thing to do because so many people are out of work because of the pandemic, and that's only exasperated for people with disabilities. So when you create an inclusive culture, you're doing a couple of things. You're increasing morale of the staff that you already have. You're reducing the turnover cost that you have to hire people because the the amount of time you have to spend training people is eliminated because uh, people with disabilities want to stay longer, and you're also uh, creating a condition where you're creating again a competitive edge over uh, people who have that closed-minded mindset. So it's a smart business decision for sure to hire uh, people with disabilities. And one of the things that I am working so hard to get employees to understand is hiring inclusively doesn't mean that it's a charity act or a charitable act. It just means that it's a smart business decision.
Do you think that it's the right move for a business owner to hire the person with the best qualifications?
Well,
And
qualification,
I
yeah,
mean that loosely because I mean that as in without regardless of any physical, mental disabilities, without any um, 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 prejudice based off of skin color, race, religion, the best abilities for the job.
yeah, absolutely. Jonathan, I'm not a huge fan of creating silos. And what I mean by that is hiring people just to check a box. If a person with a disability is a more qualified or exceedingly qualified, and you're worried about hiring people with a disability because of the accommodations you have to put in as a business. We did a study when I worked at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, and it was interesting because it found that accommodations for folks with disabilities, Jonathan, cost less than $500. 80% of accommodations cost less than $500. So if someone with a disability is the best candidate to hire based on the qualifications for a job, absolutely, I think they should be. I don't think preferential treatment should be given to people with disabilities, but at the same time, I do think that qualifications, uh, can be altered or adjusted uh, sometimes to fit what we talked about earlier about the prosperity model or the competitive advantage model. So qualification, absolutely, uh, it should be an equal playing field for everyone. But when you hire inclusively and incorporate those with disabilities, then you're really diversifying your workforce and doing the smart thing for your business.
That's awesome. I'm 100% on board with that because that's how I run my business too. I don't care. Like so long as you can do your job without me babysitting you or doing whatever, looking over your shoulder, and I know you're going to get the job done, and it's going to be 100%. You're going to give the full effort. You're on board. You're on board because that's I got a million other things to worry about too.
And when you hire people with disabilities, sometimes they can actually reduce a company's stress level because they're used to overcoming obstacles and solving problems and finding solutions to problems and making a more streamlined process, not only uh, for the employer, but also for the staff that they're employing. I'll give you a quick story. I recently contributed to inclusive roundtable about the importance of hiring people with disabilities, and one of one of the people on the table, on the round table, was a guy named Tyler Monroe. He works for a company in Toronto, actually called Agilic, and they help people within the greater Toronto area and southwestern Ontario find jobs. And he had brought up the story of training someone at a McDonald's, and they were unable to, uh, because everything in McDonald's is frozen. So they were unable to decipher what meat went into what grill and how to separate things in the refrigerator. So what Tyler did was he went to the dollar store and for $3 he bought a package of stickers. And what he did was he went into the kitchen and learned the job. And once he knew what his participant had to do, he put stickered labels on the meat to make the job go faster. So, and at the end of this process, the manager at the McDonald's came up to Tyler and said, "Oh my God, I don't know why we didn't do this in the first place. You've just made our job so much easier, and now we can hire more diverse people." So, if you have an environment, again, it's about creating the environment and conditions to be successful. And when that happens, you all win because the employee wins, the business wins, and the public you're trying to serve, they also win. So it's a triple threat of how it's supposed to work.
That's awesome. Do you believe that there could be a tipping point where it becomes too much diversity, too much inclusion, where the company starts to say, you know what, we're at this percentage of diversity and inclusion in our company. We need to get it to X amount.
No, I don't believe in artificial limits or uh, exceeding limits when it comes to inclusion because the one thing about life, Jonathan, is it keeps moving even when you want it to stop, right? So it's important to always look for increased reasons and pathways to diversify. Because the discussion about diversity, equity, and inclusion will always continue, and there'll always be avenues where you can make businesses work smarter, operate faster, and become more greener, for example, or to operate a certain set of procedures more inclusively or faster. So, in my view, the education of inclusion will always continue, and there's always room to grow.
That's awesome. Yeah, yeah, that's really good. When it comes to equity and equality in the workplace, this is a ongoing thing that happens in the workplace. I mean, it's ongoing, it's always evolving. What are some things that you can see
Mhm.
how you could improve um, equality and equity in the workplace for people with disability with physical disabilities?
Embrace differing perspectives and embrace technology. With Zoom and all of these uh, forms of video conferencing, uh, uh, the traditional way of meeting. One of the blessings of COVID, uh, and there weren't many, but one of the blessings of COVID was employers finally realized that you you don't have to have such a rigid expectation of how it's supposed to work. And what I mean by that is as long as, like you said earlier, as long as the end product gets done, who the hell cares how you do it? But you know, technology and embracing technology has been a real big win for folks with disabilities. Uh, I have the opportunity through my podcast to interview people all over the world, and and I don't have a physical office where I go to. I do it in the basement of my house. Okay, so I've talked to people as far away uh, uh, in England. I've also talked to people in France and Thailand and America and Canada. So I think the point I'm trying to make is the more that you embrace doing things differently, and the more you get away from the rigidity of perspective is what when your business or company or organization will grow the fastest. Because I think diversity of thought and perspective is something that folks with intellectual, physical, psychological, and disabilities and perspectives can bring to the table because they're used to again overcoming challenges and hurdles in both their personal and professional.
What I'm pretty much getting from you is it's not trying to change the individual that is working for the company. It's the way the company has to view the way it's working. And it's something that I've believed, and something that actually came into my past when I was given a person with a physical disability as a trainer, and I couldn't train this person because of their disabilities. This person had spina bifida, and I couldn't get him to do a squat. So I had to change, and we'll get into this as for trainers, because this is actually quite important for trainers to understand. From what you're saying, from what I'm getting from what you're saying, is that the company's got the one that has to change to suit the individual, rather than the individual adopting the company.
Yeah, and it's all about increasing the conversation about the education of what folks with disabilities can do. Now, obviously, there are certain standards and metrics you have to meet as a business owner or someone who runs an organization. But yeah, it starts with me with education. The more you can educate and have inclusive conversations of belonging as a company, as an organization, or as an executive team, the more progress we can make. So it all starts with embracing the inclusive education piece and really being open, open to learning, uh, and really uh, still keeping still keeping your core principles, but always being open to adapting and adjusting them with the times. With businesses, they always adjust with the time. If, for example, if cash flow isn't the way it's supposed to be, you go to layoffs or you cut salary, or when something happens in the market that allows you to accelerate your business, you take advantage of it. It's the same way with hiring people with uh, disabilities. It's just increasing the knowledge base and the education. So employers or company owners can operate from a position of strength, and we can get into that later about operating from a position of strength. But it starts with education so that companies can operate from a place of strength and understanding.
Yeah. So like there has to be some form of balance between the company and the employee when it comes to that kind of thing. That's what you're trying to allot to.
Yeah, the balance in the sense of don't be so rigid in trying to tip the scale on how you always do things, because if you open your mind up to adjustment or modification in the way that you do it, you may often find that the people that you're onboarding with the disabilities have a faster or more efficient way for you to do it, for sure.
Mhm. Yep, I've seen it before. I've seen it before many, many times, especially working as a trainer. There's been a lot. Um, Switching gears a little bit, how important is fitness when it comes to living with a disability? Because most of us we don't understand that.
Yeah, so I'm gonna tell you something that my grandmother, one of my grandmothers, she's 86 years old, and she spent 30 years or so working for the Detroit Public Schools as a educational assistant and helping those with disabilities get around. And she always tells me, having a grandson, obviously with a disability, if you don't use your muscles, you lose them. And as a part of my disability, my muscles contract faster, and I get lactic acid that builds up in my hamstrings if I don't stretch them out. So fitness for me is a top priority, not only because it's a good thing to do or provides me with energy and effort and all of those things that come with exercising, but if I don't use my muscles, that shortens my lifespan to begin with. So I make fitness a top priority because I want to be around for as long as I'm blessed to do that. And one of the ways I do that is making fitness a top priority, because if I don't, my muscles will die involuntarily. So it's important for me to do things like stretching my hamstrings on a regular basis. Going for walks is a big one for me to improve my endurance. Swimming is one of the best ways to treat my disability, because my muscles are looser in the pool because the gravity is gone. So fitness for me is a big deal, and I credit my support staff, the people that get paid to hang out with me to make sure that I get my exercise, and obviously to my family who, who holds me accountable to my own fitness expectations. But fitness indeed is a big priority for me, for sure.
No, that's awesome. Me personally, I've been in the gyms for the past 30 years. Yes, 30 years. And it's been very rare that I see a person with physical disabilities walking into the gym or walking or getting into the gym. Why do you think that is?
I think that there's a couple of reasons for that. I think that normal or mainstream gyms aren't set up for, quite frankly, they're not set up for people to succeed if they have a disability. Uh, every disability is different, and unless you specialize into helping folks with disabilities, it's some of the equipment or modifications that you have to make to fitness equipment is very expensive. and gym owners or people who run fitness clubs, they they have to uh, evaluate their value proposition. So if they modify a piece of equipment for someone with a disability to use it, then an able-bodied person wouldn't be able to use that same piece of equipment. So I think it's a value proposition for health club owners, and the return on the investment they would get if they did that. Now, having said that, I do think business owners or fitness people, if they want to make training or allowing folks with disabilities to uh, train uh, from a physical perspective, I think that's great. And most of the time, people with disabilities um, have to advocate for themselves. So I think it starts with uh, creating a safe space to have conversations about making fitness a priority, and then building that community of support um, that allows business owners to welcome a more inclusive crowd or audience to the fitness space for sure.
Now, that's interesting because I've personally worked for many big box gyms in Toronto when I was there. The first person with a physical disability that I worked with was blind, could not see completely. So, and my boss asked me if I wanted to take him on. I was like, yes, absolutely, because I can't show the client what I wanted him to do. I actually had to physically show him with my hands. Um, I had another client who had spina bifida and only 1% of activity in the lower extremities. And I had, even though that they were inside the big box gym, I had to change my style. Do you think it's important for gym owners to say, you know what, I think it might be a good idea to train my trainers to deal with people with disabilities, or at least get them to be exposed to that? So, because it gave me a huge different outlook on how I can train people.
The short answer to your question is yes. Be- because no, because then you then open yourself up to a new business model or a new business stream, and you allow yourself to be marketable as an inclusive workplace and an inclusive place for people that look like me and have the same level of physical ability uh, to feel included in the sense of environment. So I think if you are open to training your staff and training yourself, and opens yourself up to not only a new business model, which allows you to make more money, it allows you to also broaden your perspective of the possible as well.
Uh, I'll tell you one thing. Like, when I left that big box gym with the guy with spina bifida, he came running back. Well, he came right behind. He was like right behind me. Like when I left, he was like at the next gym with me. And none of the gyms, like you said, none of the gyms are set up for people who are in wheelchairs or have to have walkers. But again, like it's not the gym, it's not at the gym level. I think for me personally, it has to be at the trainer level. The trainer has to be able to be accommodating for people.
Yes, but I will push back. Just in this sense, it's on the gym to create the environment to allow these people to come in. So whether it's training the trainers or buying adaptive equipment, I always say, Jonathan, that people in life make time for the things that they find important. And most of the time, if you train your trainer uh, uh, on how these things work, you're again building a sense of community and self confidence in those persons that you're training. So it is on the gym to have the wherewithal to train the trainer. Because once you train the trainer, um, while all disabilities are different, at least then you would have a framework to attempt to try things that work for other people with similar disabilities. So it's about creating a framework to be successful and really embracing giving the people with disabilities the independence to advocate for their own fitness. And when you do that, you build friendships, community, you cut down on the social exclusion that I talked about earlier. So it's a win-win for the business, the trainer, and the person that's being trained or people that are being trained as well.
It's interesting because it's interesting that you said that it builds a stronger community, because when I was training this client who had spina bifida, I had behind the scenes people were coming up to me, shaking my hand for training this person. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I didn't change him. I had to change in order to train him, because I had to change. I had to change the way I'm thinking about, how do I train people? And they're like, the people around me, like they were always really nice. And it was really nice to see that everybody was like, pleasant, kind. They're willing to give up the equipment so I could train my client. And they always treated him like part of a quote unquote family. And that's what I really noticed about with people. Do you notice that people are a little bit more um, friendlier, kinder, more willing to give you a helping hand?
You were asking me about changing the perspective of people and having when they see something um, when people with disabilities are training in the gym, because it's happened with me and my support staff. Uh, People come up to my support staff, the people who are in charge of making sure that I have a life outside of my house. And they're like, "You're doing such a great job on training Kevin to be inclusive and physically fit." And my support staff and I uh, have always said that I'm just helping him live his life. It's not something that should be applauded, but I understand why it is, because it's changing attitudinal barrier. And yes, to your second point about building, I call it building bridges of inclusion. And by building the family atmosphere or aspect from a fitness level, you're also creating additional social capital for that person inside and outside of the gym, because when you see that sense of family, they're more apt to say, "Let's invite." Uh, I'll use myself as an example. Let's invite Kevin for a barbecue, or let me learn how I can uh, help Kevin attend a pool party, for example. So when you build a community of support, you're also building a community of or a bank of social capital where that person with disabilities can also recast that check with that same group of people in hopes of building additional social capital, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally believe that. And so something that I was firsthand experienced myself. I'm like, people are, giving me, high fives and shaking my hand. And I'm like, dude, I'm just doing my job because, I he's a customer and I got to give him the best service possible with what he has. So on the flip side, this is something that I want to touch up before, but it kind of slipped my mind. But I want to get your perspective on it when it comes to bullying. Bullying is a big part of the workplace, whether you're disabled or not. I'm sure with disabled people, the bullying is a little bit more because they're not quote unquote up to par with everybody else. How would you address somebody being bullied, not just in the workplace, but also in in their personal life?
Well, I think when you talk about bullying, um, it affects everyone involved. Um, oftentimes bullying in the workplace comes from a lack of understanding about uh, disabilities and how they work. And, there are instances where accommodations are made in the workplace and people stare and snicker and do all of it. But, you know, again, I view obstacles in any form of life, whether they're in the employment field or in societal life, as an opportunity to create a learning experience. Now, some people that you're just not going to change their attitudinal perspective. But if you put someone with a disability in a job, hopefully, and it doesn't always happen, but when I did this, one of the things that I look for is the ability to form a partnership. Because when you form a partnership, Jonathan, you form a sense of understanding. So bullying starts with, again, increasing or stopping bullying in the workplace. Starts with increasing the level of understanding. And um, I think we have to do a better job of staff to employee training uh, when people are onboarded on a company. And when we go over their diversity, equity, and inclusion expectations. I think bullying should be added to that because when you bully someone with a disability, it affects every aspect of their life. So I think to end it in both societal and the workplace, you have to increase the level of conversation, the level of education, and the level of perspective. Because if you're unwilling to change your perspective, then changing the way you're educating people to reach them becomes fruitless. Because if they're not willing to open up your mind, uh, then creating conditions of success. I mean, what we're always taught that companies have limited resources in most cases. So that's why creating partnerships and bullying is so important. Creating the partnership will end the cycle of exclusion. So it's about creating partnerships and increasing understanding.
Awesome. the, in one way, in a big way, I agree with you, but in another way, it is a human condition. Uh, you have some people out there that think that they're better than others, and it's been going on for eons. It's like for me, it's like the ever story of pushing up that boulder up the endless hill. But
Yeah, it's sorry to cut you off, but it's again the attitudinal barrier. You're not going to change every person, and some people are just rigid in their thing. The attitudinal barrier, if someone's not willing to recognize that, then you can change all the policy and perspective and procedure you want. But if the attitude doesn't change the person, you're right, then progress will be minimal. And oftentimes, the people that are unwilling to change their attitude or perspective on a particular issue, there's a root cause of why they're not willing to do that and not willing to address whatever problem that they have personally. So I do agree with you. Changing attitudes for some people are are going to be a never-ending struggle. But if we don't at least try to push that boulder up that proverbial hill, then I'm an alternative optimist. I I try to look at uh, the positive side of everything. You know, I'll tell you, me. So, Jonathan, I'll tell you a quick story. So, I have an identical twin brother, and Keith and I were both born with cerebral palsy. And my brother Keith, we're a minute apart. So he's the older brother. Um, my brother Keith grew out of his cerebral palsy at 4 months old. And Keith and I recently did a podcast together called A Life Worth Living. And the podcasting interviewer, who happened to be my coordinating professor when I was in the journalism in college, uh, asked my brother if he had regrets or if he uh, felt guilty about having the ability to do able-bodied things. And he said yes, because I wasn't included in certain things because of my disability. But then my brother told the interviewer that it was a chance for him to really look at ways of how to adapt perspective. And I'm not going to be able to do everything from a physical perspective that you are, Jonathan. But what I can do is look at it as an opportunity for advancement of other ways and look at where the barrier is and how I can eliminate the barrier. I tell my support staff all the time that it may not always be graceful, but as long as it's effective and works for me, then the end result is the same. But the roadmap to get there might just look a little bit different.
I love it. I love it. That's great. We're actually coming up close to the end of the show. And this is these 7 or 8 questions I ask all my guests on these general topics, and I'd like to get your perspective on them.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do a speed round for sure.
Awesome. With the increase in people that are suffering from depression, from the constant uncertainty that we've been living in the last 2 years, what would be the one thing that you could tell them to keep their hopes up?
Always remember that prosperity is on the other side of everything that is difficult. I always say that anything worth having is difficult to obtain because if it was easy, we'd all be billionaires and would have an need to work. But if you are depressed or if you are struggling with something, always remember that prosperity is on the other side of the struggle. And if you're willing to persevere through the struggle, prosperity will
What's the one thing that you do daily that amplifies your ability to stay focused?
come. Besides not focusing my attention on being a Detroit Lions fan all the time. No, I look at life as an opportunity to create conversation. So even when I'm struggling with something, or if I need personal motivation, I always remember that the only person that will fight for my level of success is me. So the thing that keeps me going is failure and disappointment is going to come for everybody. It's the idea that fighting through the adversity and the failure will allow you to prosper on the other side. So what keeps me going is the fact that I believe in my own authentic ability, and what keeps me going is that the societal perspective is better because I have a view that is different from everybody else.
That's awesome. If you could pick up the phone right now and call yourself at 20 years old, what would you tell yourself?
If I could, oh, that's so. I'm 33 now. Um, so when I was 20, I would probably tell myself that the one thing I would tell myself is just keep moving forward. Because if you keep moving forward, then eventually the law of averages will go in your favor. It doesn't always go in your favor. I always say everything in life happens exactly when it's supposed to happen. It may be frustrating not to achieve something at the instant that you may want it. But everything in life will happen exactly when it's supposed to happen. So I would tell myself that my 20-year-old self to just keep moving.
That's awesome. Looking back, would you change anything?
As far as
As far as sorry, as far as looking back to your 20-year-old self to right now, would you change anything?
no, because it's a part of my authentic story. Everything in life happens for a reason. I left a job that I really, really liked, but I wasn't effective. And at the end of the job, I looked at myself and I said, is the value of the paycheck worth the value of my prosperity? And I said, no. Uh, and I left the job. Not because I didn't like what I was doing. It's because the conditions that I put myself in for success didn't result in the result that I wanted. But to answer the question, I wouldn't change anything because it's a part of my authentic story.
What scares you?
Um, the fear of being complacent. I always tell myself that there's always something to do. You know, any part of my success is because I refuse to accept complacency as an answer to anything, whether it be in my personal or professional life. So what scares me is, and I'm not going to say nothing because that's not the truth, but what scares me is the value of knowing the fear of complacency and not falling into the trap of watching Netflix or watching movies all day because I'm feeling sorry for myself and I want to eat as much apple pie as I can consume in one sitting. So what scares me is the fear of complacency, and I work every day to try to be 1% better than I was the day before.
That's great. Where do you see let's have this conversation in the next 5 years?
I was anticipating that question, so here's my answer. Uh, so, what I want to do with a podcast is turn it into a national talk show and get paid to talk to people about issues that matter most to to them, whether it be in their personal, professional, or societal life. So the answer to that question is I want to turn the podcast into a nationally syndicated talk.
Wow, I can't wait to watch it.
Me too.
What about you personally? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 years?
Um, 5 years. Well, as I told you, I want to uh, um, host a talk show. I also, one of my life and career goals is to eventually move down to Orlando, Florida. I love Orlando. I love Florida as a state. So one of my goals in 5 years is to hopefully move down to Orlando and start a life there. Um, but I want to use my platform to always encourage inclusion. Because when you encourage inclusion, you encourage the possibility of the endless prosperity, not only for yourself, but for other people. So, for myself, in 5 years, I want to be in a position where I can create as many avenues for inclusion for as many people as possible.
Very cool. You're going to bring endless opportunities to the endless summer. I love it.
Well, yes, and hopefully I can uh, get an endless supply of shorts when I move down to.
Where can people find more about you?
Yeah, so everything about my life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is on kevinmcshan.com. And all of the links, the emails, my social media accounts are on my website. So just visit kevinmcshan.com and you can learn all about it.
Great. And we will post all the links that you sent us with the show notes so everybody has easy access to you and your content.
Fabulous. I'm looking forward to sharing the information and interview that we had today, Jonathan. And I want to thank you for allowing me the platform to engage in conversation. You're doing great work with this podcast, and it was a real honor and pleasure to be with you this afternoon. So it's most appreciated, Bonnie.
Of course, of course. I'm always happy to be interviewing like intriguing guests like you. Kevin, you have a very unique perspective to a lot of problems, quote unquote problems that people are living through, and COVID was one of those reality slaps in the face that a lot of people got. And for you to be able to have your perspective on this interesting and most complex light is next level. So thank you so much for all the hard work that you're doing. Keep doing the work yourself, because it's critical. It's critical even for people without physical disabilities to be listening to your show and to be looking at your work, and for you to be giving your perspective on things. It's at this time and juncture in life, it's critical. Thank you so much, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. And certainly, Jonathan, I'd love to extend the same invitation to you for you to be on my podcast. But for now, Bonnie, I want to thank you again for having me. And, I end all of my podcasting interviews by telling my guests have a great day to make the most difference, Bonnie. So have a great day. Make the most difference in the world that you can today, and try 1% harder tomorrow. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. I will do the best that I can. Going through hard times is just a test. What you need to know is that when you get out of whatever you're going through, you will be stronger than ever before, and you don't need to go through it alone. Always know that you are not alone. Stay tuned for more real people with amazing stories that are just like yours. Until then, to everyone out there listening, I wish you a good morning, good afternoon, or good night, wherever you may be in this crazy world.
Hey, everybody, it's John from Resilient Reboot Productions and the Fitness Oracle. Thank you for watching this episode, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. Please don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video if you are watching this on YouTube or on Rumble. If you're listening to this on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast Breaker, or whatever streaming service that you may be using, please give us a 5-star rating and a positive review, as it will help us reach more people that are suffering from mental health issues. Before you go, I'd like to invite you to join us on podinbox. This is a great platform that we can keep the conversation going. Over the years, we've discovered that the best way to help people regain their confidence back of whatever fitness goal that they are looking for is to put together a tight-knit community that will be here to support you in that journey. So in order for us to do that, we are partnering up with podinbox to help us create that platform and give you that opportunity to have your voice. All you have to do is click on the link in the show notes and set up your free account on podinbox right now, and let's hear your voice. So I can't wait to start talking to you guys there. It's a great platform for all of us to get together and discuss the issues that we're suffering from. Until then, I'll see you guys soon.